How are you?
How's everything over there?
It's cool and chilly.
Okay.
You know, I live in South Lake Tahoe in California, so I'm not over in Atlanta with the main Altis dude. So
We're both wearing caps. That's cool.
yeah, I've got my green screen up behind me there, but obviously I can't put any logos on the back of there, right?
Kobe. It's a lot of Kobe Bryant. So thanks for answering my invitation.
No problem, man. Thanks for inviting me.
So, first of all, can you introduce yourself for the coaches in Taiwan?
Mm-hmm. Sure. So my name is Nick Ward. I've been working in the field of sports performance for 30-something years. I'm the Altis Programs Director, and I've been associated, I guess, with Stu McMillan the longest, since the mid-1990s, when I met Stu in Calgary in Canada, where I did my master's degree. And my main role with Altis as the Programs Director now, kind of during pandemic and hopefully post-pandemic, is to work on our mentorship programs, coordinating, writing, working with Coach Path on all that stuff. Hey, good to see Coach Miguel and Thomas on there as well, joining in. Hi, guys. So largely I was, worked alongside Stuart with the Need for Speed course, did a lot of the learning activities for learning components of that. And yeah, right now heavily into coordinating and working on the mentorship programs, which we will eventually have 3 different levels of that. And it kind of takes me back to my early beginnings, really. I, got involved as a coach myself at the age of 15, coaching a local soccer team, and then being the de facto PE teacher at the school because the teachers were all striking, so we had no school PE going on. So I kind of jumped in with all that. And, it was really later I did my sports science degree at the University of Northumbria in Newcastle upon Tyne, jumped to Calgary, did my master's degree. And during that time, 1995, I met a guy, God rest his soul, called William Mackey, who really first introduced me to the idea of becoming a strength and conditioning coach. And what I really liked about that, and I'm not sure it's necessarily the same now, but for me, what was really appealing about the strength and conditioning coach is I almost saw myself as someone who bridged that gap between the science of training and the sports coaches. And I really felt like it gave me that interdisciplinary, sort of transdisciplinary role. And that's something which I've kind of maintained throughout the whole of my career, is to be able to have conversations both with sports coaches and also with the scientists. And where I really ended up being neither of those. I didn't do my PhD. I didn't do a lot of research. I just sort of worked in the industry and coached and whatnot. I mean, the closest I got to sports coaching really was being the father of 2 boys. You always get dragged into coaching their teams. So I became a bit of a rugby coach for a while. Also, coached football, soccer, and kind of thought that's what I was going to go into. But looking at going into coaching as a sport technical coach, for me, it just looked like a maze. Where do you go? Dead ends. How can I make a life out of it? And sports science and then strength and conditioning, that has seemed to be a little bit more of a straightforward pathway. But, I was very naive and realized that was equally a maze to find myself in and to really sort of forge a career. And, through making some good decisions, making some bad decisions, meeting good people, learning lots, and taking quite a broad perspective on my role. I don't call myself the strength guy or anything like that, or the speed guy. I take a pretty broad approach of how I work with people that have maintained a career in the industry for 30-odd years, and lucky enough to go full circle and meet back up with Stu McMillan again and work for him at Altis.
That was quite a journey, man. It was good. It was good. So, you mentioned during the pandemic, you were doing the education side of things for autists, right?
Mm.
So does that mean like Need for Speed or like the essential for autists is
So,
like yeah,
well,
yeah.
maybe go back a step. I was brought to the US because Altis were gaining some other contracts, and this one was in the health system in the US. And you know, my biggest experiences really is that I built a lot of programs for a lot of organizations, whether it be in schools or professional clubs, with funding organizations, things like the Talented Athlete Scholarship Scheme, University of Durham, Derbyshire Institute of Sport, England Golf, and then obviously with the Sheffield Eagles Rugby Club and different teams and whatnot. So what I always done was, as someone getting recruited, typically when I was recruited, you know, it's different these days, but there was nothing else. It was just me. Because how did I build these things around me? And then it became helping people with building facilities and then programs to go in those facilities. And then later on, as programs got more established, and you have things like English Institute of Sport, Talented Athlete Scholarship Scheme, various organizations then needed someone to head and lead their programs. So with that experience background, also one in business and financial side of stuff, I knew how to make money out of these programs as well. They had a program here in South Lake Tahoe with the Barton Health Hospital Group, who were building a brand new facility, which is going to have, you know, orthopedics, physiotherapy, wellness, and then performance as one of their 4 pillars. So I was recruited to do this role here, and we did that very well for about 3.5 years. Really built a very robust program, over 400 odd clients in the local community, which also include local younger athletes, school athletes. Worked very closely with a number of ACL reconstruction programs as well, both for people who are like either, I'd call them just badass recreational athletes, they're locals, you live in a mountain town, people get after stuff, they bike, they snowboard, they ski, whatever, and it's really kind of cool being involved in a more of a Gen Pop program for the first time since I was about 19, 20. But these people were really performance focused. You know, they got hurt doing their sport and they want to get back doing their sport. You know, it wasn't really about, hey, can I lose an inch off my waist and I want toned arms. It was, I want to get back on the slopes. So that was pretty motivational to work with some pretty awesome people that, you know, helped me become a better coach and look at training in a bit of a different way. But then alongside that, we started to build the performance streams. And like I said, I worked with a couple of skiers who've just been out in Beijing over the last 4 years. Worked very closely with them as their main sort of performance coach. And then, you know, the pandemic hit, the program got cut, the hospital wanted to save money. They also wanted to commandeer the new facility that had been built for what they thought was going to be needed for beds for COVID patients. But it really wasn't in the end. But so that saw me then pivot largely into being very home-based. And then Stu came to spend some time living with me for about 4 or 5 weeks when he was writing the Need for Speed course. So I assisted in that I looked at all modules and created them into sessions, looked at the learning objectives, how we wanted to debrief the sessions, the skill practices, the personal development plans that are in there. That's all my fault, all that stuff. Because I wanted to kind of make the courses a bit more engaging, like you were building a product for you at the end of it for yourself. So when you complete the Need for Speed course, you haven't just done a course, you've produced something. There's an output to it for you. And there's a couple of projects in there. And that's very much part of what I've made part of the mentorships as well. But no, Ellie Corm is the education director that really oversees the writing of all the hard courses. The mentorships for me, they're much more, transformational. There's more interaction, there's more engagement. But I think the courses still obviously form a very valuable part of that learning and education pathway for any coach, as you're piecing together what's going to be the best way for you to keep learning at this part in your career, and hence why we will be later in the summer announcing that phase 1, 2, and 3 for our mentorship program. I'm currently in the middle of writing phase 1. which is going to be focused on, the sort of like the 8 Altis essentials, and somewhat steered more towards maybe coaches earlier in their career, or maybe coaches that just feel like they want to take their knowledge base to the next sort of a level. But it's really sort of focusing on the fundamental ways in which we as Altis work, and performance and health, coexisting and being codependent, and why movement quality matters, for example, will be one of the things that obviously we're very big on. It's not just about building bigger, stronger athletes. It's with also the health of the athlete, parallel to all our decisions and our programming and planning also.
Cool. That's cool. So, like we talked before on email, and today I kind of like want to talk about like high school athletes, because I like literally just got a new like rugby team right now, and a new soccer team, and they're like under 17 like national soccer team, women's soccer team. Sorry. So for like developing their speed at like the high school age, what like should it be the first, or the first few things I should be like noticing about?
Okay, so well done. Start with a huge question.
Sorry.
Don't break me in gently. Just give me a huge question to answer.
Sorry.
So let's give a little bit of context as to why I might have some points of view on this, or some experience to offer. So at 18, I did qualify as a soccer coach in the UK under what was called the FA prelim badge at the time. So I did coach soccer for a while. I also coached women's soccer, University of Northumbria and the University of Calgary women's team. We took them to national finals within the 2 years that I was there. So I have worked in those sports. And also on the rugby side, I played rugby union at a very local club level. Kids played rugby, but I worked professionally with Sheffield Eagles rugby league. But it's rugby league, not rugby union, but it's still rugby. And I looked after the academy system there a lot. So I worked with a lot of young developing rugby players, and then also in soccer. I was the head strength and conditioning coach at Newcastle United Academy for 3 or 4 years. As well as then doing a lot of work with Hartlepool United and Sheffield Wednesday too. So a bit of a perspective and background in those sports. So some of this will be born of my experience of what I knew then. Some of it will be maybe extending my thoughts on what a lot of the current conversations we're hearing now about speed and agility and whatnot. And some of it might be just me guessing on what might be good. But what I would say is that the first thing that I actually did, both with Newcastle and with the women's team at Northumbria University, was watch them play. Watch them play first, and understand the importance of speed by watching them play. That you may even have the conversation with a coach to ask how they want to play the game, and how that might impact sort of like the movements and the intensity in which they're trying to play the game. But also, if as the coach for the women's team, for example, I could go out and set up the practices for me to make games with a speed focus, to watch how did the demand that the game was placing on them, how close were the players to matching and reaching that. So first thing for me is watch them play, observe, see what players have acceleration, can stop sharply, make decisions, can sprint for longer distances. Do they go around in circles, rather than actually, change direction? And just watch and observe, and you learn a lot about their current abilities by watching and observing. And let me give you an example. At U14 level, for example, women with a girls' soccer team that I was involved with, they were very good at running in a straight line, but actually moving sideways, they were very, very poor at. So, when you start looking at combinations of speed and velocity-based movements, there's some gaps in their movement literacy. They don't necessarily know how to confidently in the game move in all directions. So it's worth looking at that. So some players have a lot of speed, but they also don't know how to slow down. So if the play comes to a sort of a stop, they just keep on going past, right? Rather than actually knowing how to slow down, observe the game and do that. Now, is that their understanding of the game, or is that just physically they just do not have the concept or understand how to slow down? And like I said, the ability to actually move on the side, the soccer lateral movement patterns, crossover steps, people were very uncoordinated and very unbalanced. As soon as any player tried to run past them, they'd fall on the floor or whatever as well. So, speak to the coaches about their style of play if that's relevant, but also just set up practices, watch practice to see what the speed demands at that level. But also then you've got to have an eye to where they're going, recognizing that we have to be patient with adaptation. Speed doesn't come quickly. We can change the way a team plays by helping them understand how to take time and space away from the other team. Therefore, you can appear to play faster by the way you nullify how another team plays. That's working with the coaches on that. That's nothing that we would do as strength and conditioning coaches, right? That's adjusting how the game is being played, move the ball faster, whatnot. But, I think you need to then sort of look at, let's take the sort of sport of soccer or rugby, look at it over its whole kind of lifespan. How do people perform at the elite levels? How do they play at U9 levels? Kind of one thing Coach Paff was really big on is always doing your audit at whatever stage you're working on. What are the best players or the best teams at that stage doing? What do they look like? How do they play? And understanding that, across all stages. So you've got some idea then, not just where that player is, they're aspiring to go to, but also where they might have come from. So even within your system, for example, what's happening in the years at 10, 11, 12, 13, 15. So you might have some idea of their training background, their movement literacy, what are the sports that they've been exposed to. In another country, that could be completely different. To when did they start the sport? What was their training background? What sports have they been exposed to? So for me, I like the idea of kind of sandwiching that with an idea of where are we trying to take them to? Where have they come from? Because everyone's a product of their history. And okay, now how are we going to start, putting the filling in the sandwich for this part of where they are right now? And when we've eaten that sandwich, where's the next bit we're going to go to?
Love it. So it's not like just being a sport, not just like being a strength and conditioning coach. It's more like you need to know the sports, the culture, and like what you just said, like where are the, like, let's say professional rugby athlete looks like, and where are they coming from? So you have the whole picture. What should I be building right now? Right?
Yes, it's like building a house, right? When you go back to very old architecture, if you look at any old church or building, it started as a smaller building, and then someone had a vision for it, it built on. But there wasn't just building these structures, things inside had to change as well. And I think, looking at a career like that is a little bit like starting off with our basic foundations of a small hamlet praying chapel, and somewhere at the end you now make it into a cathedral. But there's a lot of stages of growth and development that kind of goes into that.
Cool. So I'm gonna like jump into another topic about like speed training, and like we mentioned on the email. So when training speed, like also same as like for the young athletes, and if I want to like do like resistance sprinting, like how should I be programming the resistance sprinting? like for acceleration?
Well, I guess my first question will be, what problem are we trying to solve? Why are we going to resisted sprinting? You know, what's the problem? Because can they actually run, first of all? You know, so first of all, I'll be saying, can they run?
Sure.
You know the rules before we break the rules, right? So, you know, JB Morin will often say this, and I think there was a post out today by Steve Magnus. If you want to get faster, run. That was the cheat sheet, right? So I think sometimes as strength and conditioning coaches, we avoid the obvious answer. If we want to get faster, go and run. And we think there's all this other strength and conditioning stuff that will make us faster. Now, don't get me wrong. There are capacities that underpin acceleration. We know that maximum strength can underpin good acceleration abilities. We also know that as a proxy for max strength, we can look at something like a broad jump as a measurement, as a proxy of maximum strength. Because we also know that a broad jump correlates very highly to a 5 or 10 meter sprint time. So you have the thing you actually want to do, proxies for measurement of that if you can't keep sprinting all the time, depend on time or whatever, and then you've got max strength, which is a capacity which underpins it. But if you still don't know how to run, you know, you're going to be, you might still be effective, but you won't be as efficient. And effective means that you can probably get away with doing it the way you do it, but at some point there's going to be a decrease in performance because of the inefficiency, or there's a decrease in performance because you might go and hurt yourself because of, again, the inefficiency in the movement. So the inefficiency comes in two ways. One is as an energy cost, that you just can't keep up these efforts in a game, you know, but you're effective to a point. Or the inefficiency it comes down to it from a movement perspective, where the movement is, in some respects, that house we were talking about building, you've built it on a fault line, and there's earthquakes every now and then. All right. And so things get disrupted, structures get disrupted, and then something breaks down because of that inefficient pattern. So I think there's a balance of both. You know, from a younger developing point of view, I think for sure capacities help get them stronger, get them jumping better. Those things do relate. But I also feel that we have to focus on the actual movement, what we're trying to train, which is the art of acceleration. So with the sled work and stuff, to go back to your exact question, typically in an earlier athlete development, I don't actually do any sprints with the sleds, but I might get them pushing sleds and pulling sleds to build up strength and postures that look a bit more like acceleration. You know, squatting is great for the leg strength, but the posture, you know, isn't necessarily the same as accelerating. So what I find is that depending on time and equipment that you have available, you know, I've had years where I've had no weight room available to me. So we've had to find tires. We've had to find things we can pull and stuff, right? I mean, I'm from a generation where, you know, I had a garden shed where there were some bricks and some tires and things in there. That's what we had. These generations that only know a multi-million-dollar well-equipped weight room, so therefore you only know the tools, you've got to learn the principles and understand the physics behind it, because then anything can become a tool to do this, right? And hence why sleds really evolved, right? Because people didn't have all the weight rooms around.
Yeah.
But they become a nice, you know, again, intermediate step, just like, you know, you can go from a back squat to weightlifting to plyos to sprinting. There's a kind of a continuum there, right, on that force velocity profiling. So early for me with the kids, I don't really get them to do sled sprints or even heavy resisted sled sprints. I will work with the sleds to be an alternative to strength training, and work on postures, getting them to learn how to actually use their hips and not overextend the knee. And that's where I was using those in coordination then with a weight room program if we had that available to us. So like Dan Path speaks about rollover programs. Day one could be the regular weight room work. Day two might be more out in the field now, where the sleds and stuff come in, and maybe medicine ball work on that day. And day three is more dynamic with, it could still be medicine balls on that day with the plyometric work, accelerations and stuff on that day. I mean, I probably would have done accelerations in day 2 as well. These 3-day rollovers, I normally have some form of acceleration looking type work in 2 of those 3 days.
Cool. So you mentioned posture a lot. So how does that mean, like, you're going to spend a lot of time, like, teaching them the basic stuff, like the A skip, B skip, or like bounding, that kind of stuff?
Well, you call those basics. We still do those every single day with Olympic athletes. That doesn't change. The foundations are the foundations, you know, they are what they are, because they also become good indicators of how well is your athlete moving on that day. You know, you do certain big rock workouts or exercise on a regular basis. You pick up on, you know, a faulty foot mechanic, you know, stiff back. You see it, and people too often want to change, you know, even within, you know, if you're familiar with the Rudiment series, you know, it's a free download on the Altis website. There's still ways you can create variation within that, but the basic principles stay the same. So from a posture point of view, let's talk about shapes, right? So from a team sport perspective, through my own analysis, one of the things that I observed in players that seem to demonstrate explosive running abilities, who actually you might not necessarily consider that fast, but when the opportunity was there, they could accelerate. One of the key things was their foot and ankle position. So a dorsiflexed ankle was one of the things that I started to really take on board for both my soccer and rugby players as being, that's a pretty key position. And it's one of the 5, you know, key positions that we talk about in the Need for Speed program. So ability to have a dorsiflexed ankle, which allowed you to strike the ground and not be passive on the ground. Also not to land on toes. You know, the idea of being on toes was probably the worst coaching cue ever invented. All right. That, you know, we want our people to have a dorsiflexed, you know, fixed ankle, from which then when that strikes the ground, then you're able to propulse off in that toe off phase. So that was the first one that I saw in rugby players and soccer players. Second one then is kind of a bit tricky, because when we talk about hip posture, so many of our rugby players, especially at the elite levels, because of lots of squatting and tight quads and a very quad dominant, you know, they're very hyperextended, you know, very anterior pelvic position. So that becomes something which I identified the faster players that, because of previous programs, would have been doing a lot of more heavy resistance work. So I just lightened those loads a little bit. And so they might have been more of a, let's call it the speed strength days with dynamic days rather than strength days. And immediately their postures seemed to get, well, not immediately, it took time, they got better, and they were freer to move. And we had a couple of wingers that had a couple of injury histories from a hamstring perspective. And really for them to be able to express themselves in the game, Eric, they just wanted to feel confident they weren't going to pull a hamstring again. And so if we did like a heavy strength training session with them, they felt tight and stiff for the rest of the week. So I would sprinkle a heavy set of squats or deadlifts, whatever their preference was, in very periodically. Because if I did that every single week, it would just mess up their hip posture on top of everything else they were doing in the games. So I had to think carefully about that. But you know, doing things like hang cleans and stuff like that was okay, but you could still do with relatively high loads. And sometimes you have to recognize that what we did on Monday interfaces what we do on Tuesday, interfaces what we do on Wednesday, and there's this interaction effect that can, you know, bring us gains that we only think we can get by sticking to one type of mode of training. So again, that 3-day rollover comes into effect, you know, with those players. And, you know, for the fast guys, you know, they need to feel free. They need to feel they can put their foot to the floor and go. And so it's kind of really important to, you know, look at the basics from a traditional point of view, but recognize where other training aspects like the weight room can mess up posture. So things like the A marches, the Bs and stuff like that, they give people the idea of the shapes, but I don't think they actually train the shapes. I think the training of the shapes only come when you put them under more pressure and load. So that comes from doing things like the sled walks and drags and stuff where you're kind of looking at a bit of a structural integrity where they can hold postures, but in a number of different fashions. And where things like the A skips and B skips again, and kettlebell exercises will stress that posture, and you're looking for as many ways in which you can challenge that hip posture, and almost like checkboxing that, yep, they can do it there, they're holding it here, they're holding it here, that looks good. And so that's kind of the way I go about that, not using the A's and B's and stuff to change the posture, but more to give people the understanding of what it should feel and look like. And when they find it, how the outcome is different in terms of, their distance they might cover in a skip, or just the rhythm they can maintain in a skip becomes different. So that then buys them into the idea of thinking of posture while doing the weight room work and not ignoring it. Thinking of posture while being out on the field doing the medicine ball work or whatever. So if you can create that thread for the athlete so they see the purpose, that then gives them, I think, real drive and intent to execute the things we're asking them to do more appropriately.
So you talk about like hip posture and like the knee, the foot ankle. Mm-hmm. Yeah. So when you look at hip posture, so what is the difference between the acceleration and high and speed hip? Where's the hip? Where's the hips? Sorry.
I wish I could pull up the Need for Speed course for you right now and show you some of Stuart's diagrams, right?
I know.
So, really, I mean, you've got a body which is angled like this and one which is now like this, right? So there's a slightly different orientation, but you're really always looking for that. We hate to call it neutral pelvis because that brings up a lot of different connotations to people. But a pelvis that is in a position where it's actually capable of moving in all directions. So it's able to oscillate and both undulate. But if it's fixed in one position, then you really struggle to move in those other planes of motion. Frontal plane is challenged, sagittal plane gets challenged, and certainly the transverse plane gets challenged as well if it gets stuck into that anterior position. So really, again, if you think of the back of the pelvis, that needs to be in alignment, with the spine, whether in acceleration or in upright running.
Cool. So there's also like coaches talk about like the hip posture also affects like the people say front side mechanic, back side mechanic, and where the foot's gonna land on the ground.
Mm-hmm.
So, like, how does the hip posture affects like where you hit the ground? So let's first of all recognize that how the foot hits the ground can come from a number of different factors. Yeah. Core stability has been a phrase and a buzzword for a long time, and core stability is a little bit like, it's very like proprioception, right? It's not a noun, it's a verb. It's something we're doing all the time. There isn't nothing special about it. It's just stuff that we do. And from a proprioception and a trunk core stability point of view, we either do it well in the task or we don't do it well. And it's our ability then to identify whether that is something which we can coach, i.e. it's maybe more technical or cue worthy, or it's something that we have to go away and maybe change some structures and some function around what's going on. But, from working with a masters athlete last night, it was a marathon runner, 48, she's like a 3 hour 40 marathon runner who's had 2 ACLs. So then,
working with my Olympic skier, so I can give you two examples. First of all, why are we even concerned with foot contact in Olympic skiers when they're tied in boots all the time? Right? It sounds pointless, right? Why are we concerned about that? Well, again, take the bigger lens away. They don't walk around in their boots all day. They have feet that they have to walk on as well. And so if some of the gait or posture in their feet is being affected through the rest of their day, how does that affect up the chain into their possible back and pelvic posture, which then if they find themselves in a kind of a low level, long-term position, how does that affect them when they do get their boots on and onto the snow? So partly we have to think about people who have things like boots around them all the time. How are they moving in the rest of their lives? I think athletes should have this ability to move between my posture for living and what my sport requires. And I think the more fluid athletes can be between those two, I can find my sports position. It's comfortable, it's efficient for me finding it, but I can also get out of it. Think of golfers, for example, who all seem to have one shoulder lower than the other because that's how they play, right? They walk around with one shoulder down. You know, I think we should have, and one of the greatest athletes I ever saw who could do that was a soccer player called Ruud Gullit. He was the manager at the time when I worked for Newcastle. You know, he had this posture that he walked around in all the time. And yet then as a tall soccer player on the field, you'd watch him bend and move and find great shapes, you know. But he didn't walk around hunched up all the time, right? He had this lovely poise and posture. And so, you know, a lot of that can come from hip tightness in our world of sitting at desks and, you know, playing computer games and watching too much TV. And with COVID, three main areas that we tend to create a lot of stiffness in the joints: our ankles, our hips, and our T-spine. And it can be a cascade of events from any of those that might actually affect what's happening at the foot. If the ankle is stiff, all right, whatever messages it might be getting from a perfect pelvis and T-spine, if it's stiff, right, and it feels like it can't anticipate the floor, it's going to change position and it's going to probably rock in or rock out. You know, everyone might be a little bit different with that. Likewise, if we've got really good mobility in our feet and ankles, and like you said, we have very tight hips and we're unable to maybe get the thigh driven up as high, what we would do to try and make room for that is that we will turn inwards. And likewise at the bottom, if we don't feel that we can get as much hip extension because we're tight in the frontal plane, if we can't get as much extension, we're going to externally rotate to try and find that extension. And all that then, as the leg comes off the floor and repositions for the next foot strike, is going to impact how that foot might strike. So someone might strike more pronated, other people more pronated, other people might strike more supinated, based on their inability then to reposition the limb in the air, or that repositioning is dictated by, you know, some kind of pelvic abnormality, not abnormality, wrong word to use, but, you know, pelvic dysfunction that's going on. Because if they're limited in this range, they're going to find it by going out this way or coming in this way, because that's then really going to limit how those hips can actually oscillate and undulate, which is part of that force projection into the ground. T-spine's tight. If the T-spine is also tight, right, and they're unable to rotate, then how does that affect the hips? If this isn't rotating in rhythm or harmony with the hips, then you might find the hips are actually over-rotating, which might then lead to a lower limb swing leg striking out further on one side more than the other. So like with my Masters athlete last night, she had 2 ACLs on her right leg in the past history. Her right foot wants to get off quickly. Now, in that right leg getting off quickly, her left arm jumps to help it get off the ground. But then her left leg swings through. She has a very low recovery, strikes in front of the body. Therefore, she spends more time on that left side. And because she lands very internally rotated, whatever's got to go internal comes external. That then has meant her left hip has got very, very tight over time, you know, because of her, what I would call poor rehabilitation from her ACL surgeries, because all they focused on was the injured side. They didn't look at her globally as a runner. So for her, a knee injury has led to hip stiffness and tightness, which has now led to a left foot dysfunction.
Good, good. That's good. Appreciate it. So I'm going to ask the last question I have for today. I'm sorry the question kind of like all around. I'm sorry. So the last thing would be, you mentioned like there's like athlete coming back from ACL injury. And I know that's kind of like, you see a lot of these kind of stuff when you train like rugby or soccer or American football athletes, right? ACL injury, or sometimes they pull their hamstring, or what just happened like for like Odell Beckham Jr., right? So for training these kind of athletes, like when they are coming back from their injury or their like they just got their permission from the probably like their PT, what are the like, what should I be like focusing on? And the first, should I be training more on acceleration first, or like should I be like do some weight training so they get enough of like strength first?
Well, first of all, I really hope that the first contact you have with this athlete is not when the physiotherapist is finished with them. I hope that your process is that you have been involved in this from the beginning, and that while the physiotherapist might be responsible for the program, you've been engaged in everything. So you've already seen the progressions they're going through, what their functional capabilities are, and now what's happening is a handover of responsibility. That's really what should happen. Not, yeah, they've been with the physio for 3 months, now they're yours. That's a disaster. But that's happened to me a lot as well, right? And that's why I realized that sometimes the medical staff are in their own world because they're very focused on what they're doing. We have to put ourselves in their world, be supportive of them, ask them, and be there to help the process along. Because like I said about these other athletes, the medical staff will often focus on the injured side. They'll do some random kind of got to keep them fit type training, do thousands of reps of planks and stuff like that, which kind of serves no purpose towards what the end goal is.
Yeah.
Representative learning design says we got to get them back to what it is they need to be doing.
Yeah.
So you can have some influence. And working with the US Ski and Snowboard, they have an excellent return to snow program, really thought it through. Gillian Bauer there, Troy Taylor at the time, Callum Butterfield, who I work with, kudos to them, where as strength and conditioning, you're involved before an athlete gets injured, you're involved when they got injured, and you're involved while they're rehabbing back from that. And there's a takeover point from all this as well. So in terms of, what is it that you should do? I mean, obviously the nature of the injury relates to that. Understanding, is this an historical injury? Has it happened more than once? There's all those factors to think about as well. You can work to keep the rest of the body well and healthy while the injured leg is somewhat restricted. Do what you can to. I think there's been some good stuff coming out on Sportsmith recently about trunk exercises you can do while going through a lower limb injury and whatnot. And partly is keeping the athlete mental capacities on the right side of not going insane. They're used to doing their sport day in, day out. They can't do that. And, I think you have to recognize part of this is their mental health as well. So it doesn't always have to be the highest scientific performance-based work. Sometimes you're there to be not necessarily a friend, but someone they can trust, a trusted advisor that, you just hopefully make their day a little bit more exciting. Excuse me, I need to turn my light back on.
No worries.
So hopefully you've been part of that pathway. But, we have things like the dribble series, the rudiment jumps, that we introduced very, very early. One of the biggest things we did with the ACL people here and to work with the rehab department of Barton Health was to get people feeling confident of finding the ground again as soon as they can. They get very tentative of finding the ground. So, even just doing walking dribbles, again, the Dribble Series ebook is on the Altis website under free resources, starts to get people feeling like they can find the ground, get some rhythm. The rudiments might be too soon, obviously, if they're saying no jumping allowed at certain points, but there's other ways in which you can teach people to jump, getting them to sit in their chair, rock back and up, rock back and up. It gives them the idea of that explosiveness. That's something I actually learned from my friend Kyla Kraus, who works with a lot of elderly populations, of how to build explosiveness, how to get basically an old person swinging their legs to get out of a chair. That's something now that we use in ACL work to get people confident in exploding up on their legs without it being a jump or a plyometric too. You would have heard a lot about hamstring development and a lot of hamstring work, and I feel personally, from my experiences, that I've never focused just on slow tempo isometrics or just slow tempo eccentrics or just isometrics. I've all done a range of oscillatory work, heavy work, fast breaking work. I've found that we can't just treat the hamstrings as purely just a muscle. That has a function to work across the knee and the hip. There's a lot of motor control that goes on in that. So as soon as we can think about the hamstring more as part of a long chain of functional movement structures, the better that will be for us. Hip work and balance work and whatnot as well. Sometimes with ACLs, there's other conspirators, confounding factors. What type of operation was it? Was it their own patella tendon that was used? Was it hamstring graft? Was there any other injuries to the tibial plateau, any fractures, any cartilage damage? So all of this plays into quite a complex situation, which is why I think it's very important the S&C coach, even if it's not a club or a team that you're at regularly, can you be part of that process? And it's one of the best deep dives any strength and conditioning coach I think could ever do, is really be involved with the process of this from the beginning. I think you learn so much. When I was at the rugby and soccer clubs, I probably never really got involved till phase 3. It was only being here working with the skiers, Eric, that I actually went in to see the surgeries. So I see what happens. When you actually see it, it really gives you a very different perspective of some of the stupid stuff we're trying to get them to do after only 2 or 3 months. Because you've seen what's gone on in that knee and what they've cut and everything else, right? Okay. So if you can get in to see an operation, it really does give you another lens to understand what that joint, but what that person has gone through and why they might be in a lot of pain for a while and whatnot too. So there's a lot of factors that get involved in that. But, it's an athletic development model. When you think about physiotherapy, doing interventions, what we do as strength and conditioning coaches is take those things that work and we just stretch their use out for longer. And we might load them a bit heavier. We might start adding a bit more velocity to it. But essentially, no one owns exercises, right? Training is training. Just depends at what point. What is the focus of your training? What's your purpose of your training right now? Are you purposely working towards a higher level of function? Now, a lot of those exercises that you've used here to get to this level of function, just because you cross that threshold, don't all of a sudden have to change into 100 brand new exercises. There's a continuation of that task and how those tasks can get more challenging. Again, simply from what we would know as strength and conditioning coaches, putting more weight on, changing the tempo of the lifts, maybe perturbing the exercise a little bit. But even going from 2 legs to 1 leg is a huge different challenge in exercises. then, like we said, increasing the velocity. Then there's the movement control and movement side of it, which I think there's a lot of crossover there now in looking at neuroscience and learning from some specialists in that, where I think strength and conditioning coaches probably could get a little bit better at recognizing that this namby-pamby, really soft little movement drill that the physio is given, that we go, now, what's that going to do, may actually have a lot more use than we realize in the activities. Also, how do we expose them to challenging environments, which gets their brain involved a lot more, rather than it being just mundane going through the reps, to try and create that sort of brain-body connection. Let's not cut them off from here and don't think this part is not important. So that's key as well. But the main message there is that any of the exercises and stuff that have happened in the early phases of rehab, they don't necessarily go away. You just change the nature of the task, because as they reach different levels of function, the problem being asked of them changes. So you change some of those things you're trying to get them to do and make them more challenging, more difficult as you keep progressing through that process. But the golden thing here, you look at Matt Jordan's work, is that so many skiers come back 2 years after an ACL and re-blow the same leg, And that's because people forget to keep going with that process. Takes a long, long time. Adaptation is slow. So we have to keep working with them on those balances of hamstrings and whatnot. And Matt's work shows us a lot on that. So, it's not something that you ever stop working with once they've had that ACL.
Got it. Get it.
Hey, Tenzin, how you doing? If you're still there, I've got my brother on here as well. Chris, how you doing? You're famous, Eric. People from all over the world there.
Thanks.
All right, man.
That's like all the questions I have for today, and appreciate for your time. So the last thing would be like, what is the future for you and the Altis? And if people are like interested in what we're talking about today, where can they find you?
Well, honestly, let me start off where they can find me, n.ward@altis.world. I live in South Lake Tahoe. You can get me on Nick Ward _coach or coach _Nick Ward on Twitter and Instagram. Happy to answer questions. Future of me is I am thoroughly enjoying my coach developer role, and really see, again, like I said, I did that many years. I see myself going way more in that direction, but I still love coaching athletes, and depends on where the careers of my two Olympic skiers are going to go now, if they decide to have another quadrennial. But honestly, my real passion is working with younger athletes, always has been. And I've got a real nice group of younger athletes that I'm working with both remotely and here in South Lake Tahoe, that hopefully will grow. And with Altis, they're now based in Atlanta. Our real dream is that we want to have our own facility for coach education and athlete training. And that's what we need to make our money for, raise our funds so we can recreate what we had in Phoenix, where lots of coaches could come and visit us, have a true live living experience for coaches to come and enjoy in Atlanta, as well as, the fastest athletes in the world have a location where they can come and train and be with us as well. And that's what we want to be. We want to ensure we can inspire a future generation of coaches. Many young people may not even be considering coaching. We want to encourage them to consider coaching as a career pathway, and we really want to be able to support that as well. Not just coaches at the high level or the middle part of their career, but really encourage coaches from all sides of the spectrum to consider this. Because coaching, we know, right? It's changed my life. It's changing your life. It changes the lives of people that we coach. It's taken people to the Olympic Games. It's taken me to 3 different countries. It's had an impact on my family. It really does have that. And, I think a lot of young people in the world right now, from what I see and what I hear, there's such a power to do good. And coaching is one of the main ways that they could do that. So we hope eventually when we get our own facility back and we have this center for coach education and training performance. That's what we can really keep our mission focused on.
Love it. Looking forward for the coaching center, man. I visited the Phoenix Exos before, so looking forward when you have your own facility.
So are we.
So thank you for your time. I'm sorry about like the question is like all wrong. Please appreciate
Just
it.
Do it better next time.
Okay.
That's good, man.
Okay, thanks.
Thanks for the chat. Bye bye.